So our series title for the month is Long Awaited. And we began by thinking about and actually asking this question: what's it like to wait for something? We talked about, the trivial wait for something, whether it be at the DMV or maybe you're waiting in line at the grocery store and you've tried to pick the fastest line and maybe yours isn't the fastest line and there's a little bit of frustration there. But then we talked also about what's it like to wait for something when it really matters. When what you're waiting for is something that you're really invested in, you're really hoping for, you've got everything riding on it. Well, certainly as people were waiting for the arrival of Jesus, as waiting for the Messiah to be born, as the nation of Israel was waiting, and as Adam had been waiting, although he'd been passed for many years on from this life, for one to be born that would crush the head of the serpent. And as Abraham, who'd been waiting for the one who would be born that would be his seed, that through him all nations would be blessed, as David had been waiting for one to reign on his throne forever. There were many who had a lot riding on the coming of Jesus. And so in the first message, we ended with this statement that every time we look at the stories detailing Jesus' birth, we discover anew that in Jesus we find what we have long been waiting for. In that first message, we talked about the fact that it wasn't just the Israelites, and it wasn't just Abraham, it wasn't just Adam, it wasn't just Isaiah who spoke this wonderful prophecy that we have been spending our time in this month. It's also us. We realize that in Jesus, we find what we have been waiting for as well. And so last week, we made this statement that with the coming of Jesus, the night that seemed it would never end, that brought with it hopelessness and despair, has finally come to an end. Now, you and I, we need some hope in our lives. We need real hope in our lives, not just a hope that comes and goes. It's fleeting hope that's here for a little while and then gone. We need an everlasting hope. We need a real hope. And so we said last week that every time we look at the stories detailing Jesus' birth, we discover that only in Jesus do we find our long-awaited hope, the hope that we've really been waiting for, the thing that we're really invested in, the thing that really matters. That's where we can find that hope. It's in Jesus. Well, I want you to think with me real quickly. Maybe you've had this experience in your life where maybe you're out at the grocery store, or you might be out at the movies, or you just happen to be somewhere. I don't know where it was for you. I know it's happened to me a few times. I've been out at restaurants, and maybe I bumped into someone. I started talking with someone, and it wasn't until after I finished that conversation that maybe somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, do you know who you were just talking to?" And most of the time, the reality is my answer has been no. I didn't know who I was just talking to. Didn't know who I was just talking with. Think of one particular story. We were in a restaurant that friends of ours own in Florida, and was talking with a guy there. We were just talking about our common love for sushi. I mean, that's all we were talking about. I like sushi, you like sushi, what are you eating? Oh man, that's a ton of sushi. And this guy, seriously, he was there with 3 friends, and they had a sushi spread like I've never seen. Now, to some of you, you're thinking, that is like the closest thing to heaven on earth, and others of you are thinking, seriously, if I go to hell, I'll be eating sushi for the rest of my life. Right? And watching soccer for some of you, which I don't know what's wrong with you if you think that, but so I'm talking with this guy about, the different things that they've ordered, this sushi on the table in front of them, and go and find my seat, and the owner of the restaurant, good friend, came and talked to me, and he said, do you know him? I said, no, I never met him before. He said, do you know who that is? I said, no, I have no idea. He said, that's Pedro Alvarez. He plays for the Pirates. I'm like, oh, okay. So I just met a guy that was in the All-Star game a few years ago. That's kind of cool. Well, there's other stories about this. I read a story about a guy who was, they were out in California. He was out in California, and he'd rented a motorcycle to go riding that day. And so he came to the gas station. He'd been riding for a while, needed to put some more gas in the bike. So he pulls up to the pump, and right next to him on the other side of it, there's a guy. He's got his helmet on. He's got a motorcycle as well. So they just pick up and they start chatting, just like people do. When you got something in common, I got a bike, you got a bike. Let's talk about this. Where are you riding? So the guy says, well, I'm about to go to the canyon. Oh, okay, canyon. I don't know anything about this. I'm actually not from here. Well, you want to follow me? I'll take you down and I'll show you around. And it's one of the greatest rides you'll ever go through. It's fantastic. Okay, yeah, let's do it. So they go and they ride together and they have a blast. Well, they get to about lunchtime, and the one guy said to the other, this is the guy who turns out to be famous, says to the other, says, hey, I'm kind of hungry. You want to go grab some lunch? The guy says, sure, what do you have in mind? He says, I know this little place right up the way. Let's go grab some lunch there. So they go to this restaurant and they pull up and the restaurant's actually closed. And of course, the guy that's visiting there, the one that was on vacation, thinks, well, the restaurant's closed. That's just the way it is. Until the guy takes off his helmet and actually somebody inside the restaurant sees who it is and runs to the door and opens the door because this guy who was just on vacation and thought he was just having a ride with a cool guy just realizes all of a sudden that I've been riding with Brad Pitt for the last several hours. There's a story about another story a few years before that, and I think in the 90s actually. The guy jumped on a ski lift, and when you jump on a ski lift, you got your goggles and you got your toboggan on, and you can't really tell, who you are and who the other person is next to you, but they put two people on a ski lift because, that's what they do. They're trying to get as many people up the mountain as possible. So this guy's out in Vail, Colorado, and he's getting ready to go skiing. He gets on the lift, and another guy gets on the lift next to him, and they just kind of start talking, strike up a conversation, talking about what each one of them does for a living. The guy says, well, I'm actually a banker. I'm an investor. And so he starts telling him a little bit about what he does, and he asks the other guy, okay, well, what do you do? And he says, I'm an actor. Oh, really, an actor? What do you do? Have you ever been in anything? Well, he said, have you ever seen a movie called Star Wars? Yeah. He says, well, I played Luke Skywalker. And so he's on the lift next to Mark Hamill, and he has no idea. I mean, have you ever been in a moment like that where you've met somebody, you talked to somebody, you had no idea who they were until a little bit of a time goes by? Maybe they introduce themselves for you, or they take off their helmet, or they just say, hey, have you seen a movie called Star Wars? You ever seen that? And all of a sudden you realize you're in the presence of someone who was, well, at least by our standards, right? I mean, here's someone who's just living at this level and the rest of us are somewhere down here, or at least that's kind of how we have it in our minds sometimes, right? I just met this really famous person. I had no idea I was even talking to them. I want you to keep that thought in mind as we begin to walk through this message this morning. We're going to read again, reconnect with our passage from Isaiah 9, 2 through 7. And every week we're reading this passage together. This is a prophecy about Jesus, and it's out of this passage that we're pulling some really important things about who Jesus is and who he came to be. This is what Isaiah says. He says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. That's where we got our first week's message from. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Well, the short verses that I want to zoom in on this morning, focus in on, are actually verses 6 and 7 right here. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. Now, I want you to start to think about what kind of imagery that conjures in your mind. As you hear these words, the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Again here, of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. What Isaiah is telling us about Jesus is that Jesus came to be king. Now, that's something we don't often talk about or that we don't often think about. Certainly in American Christianity, until the last few years, we haven't often talked about Jesus as king. We talk about him as Savior, and we talk about him as Messiah, and all those things are true. We talk about him as a lot of things, but we haven't often focused on the fact that Jesus came to be king. He came to be king of my life, king of your life, king of the universe, king of everything. With that idea in mind, I kind of started thinking this week. Kind of started wondering, too, if somebody who didn't know anyone or anything about Christianity, and this question I kind of started working with through my mind. If somebody didn't know anything about Christianity and they started watching Christians and the way we live and the way we talk about Jesus, what might they conclude about Jesus, or at least about what we believe about his identity? And I don't just mean you and me. I mean everyone who calls themselves a Christian. Okay, so all people who call themselves Christians, if we just started watching and we didn't know anything about Jesus, what kind of things might we conclude about who Jesus is by the way we live, by the way we talk, by the way we think about him? I think probably some people would conclude that Jesus was a good man. I mean, he was a good man. We often talk about Jesus as our example. I can think about some good men that I've watched live their lives, and there are things about the way that they've lived their lives that I've thought, I'd like to emulate that. If I could do that, I'd just plain be better at life. If I did what he did consistently, I'd be more successful. I might be nicer, might be kinder to others. I'd be more patient. And certainly that's true about Jesus. As we look at Jesus, we can say, yeah, he's our example in patience and kindness and goodness, self-control, all these things. Jesus was a good man. And there's no doubt that that is true, but if we just think about Jesus as a good man, it's an incomplete picture for sure. Especially if we think about Jesus primarily as a good man, this is going to give us an incomplete picture. But what about this one? I think if people listen to us talk, and if they could hear the way we think inside, they might conclude every now and then that we think that Jesus is primarily a teacher. Jesus was a teacher. He was a wise man. He said a lot of really smart things. I mean, have you read the Sermon on the Mount? So much wisdom contained in the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, over and over, Jesus points us to things that we ought to be in life. And if we could follow his words as a good teacher, then we'd all be better off. And so maybe that's what Jesus came to be, primarily another teacher. Except that Jesus tells us, I didn't just come to be another rabbi. That's not why I'm here. Now, I am a rabbi, but that's not why I'm here. Well, what about this? Some might conclude that we believe that Jesus was a great leader. And certainly Jesus' way of leading, the way he engaged with people, Jesus was a great leader. Jesus had a different way of leading than we often do in our world today, but it was very successful. I mean, think about the movement that Jesus began. And how did he do it? Well, there were times where Jesus stood in front of crowds, but by and large, Jesus didn't lead large crowds everywhere he went. He led 12 disciples everywhere he went. But through the 12 disciples that he led everywhere he went, the 3 years he invested in them, the way he led them and poured into them, those 12 disciples went on to change the world by making other disciples who made other disciples. And so if that's true, then Jesus must be a great leader. And that's true about Jesus. But if we think of Jesus primarily as a great leader, again, we're missing it. What about this one? If you pick up a lot of books that have been written in the last few years, you'll certainly be able to conclude that maybe Jesus was a cultural rebel. And certainly, I think to some degree, this is true about Jesus. I mean, he came to turn the world upside down. There's no doubt. I mean, yeah, he did walk into the temple and he flipped tables when they were messing around in God's house and really, truly making a mess of the thing that God had set up. Well, maybe that's what Jesus came to do. He came to flip tables. I mean, that's what he's here to do. He came to flip tables and he came to challenge cultural norms and social idols and all those things. That's what Jesus was here to do, right? And certainly, if you listen to some, you could conclude that Jesus came primarily to be a cultural rebel. And certainly, Jesus did some of that. But that's not primarily why Jesus came to earth. Now, if you listen to some as well, you might conclude that Jesus came to earth to be a spiritual guru. He came to help you achieve or reach somehow the next level of existence, for you to somehow embrace your inner divine even. There's been a real melding, again here recently, between some New Age thinking and Christianity. If we could just take maybe the best of New Age thinking, the best of Christianity, we put them together, we could help people become their best selves by getting in touch with some sort of spirituality inside of them. And Jesus certainly was, you could say Jesus was the ultimate spiritual guru, but not in the way we often think, not in the way that some are putting him out there. So if you think that Jesus came primarily to just be a spiritual guru, we're certainly going to miss something really important about Jesus. Or how about this one? How about this one? Jesus came to be my best bud. Now, the reality is this: Jesus came to be my friend and he came to be your friend. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we even sing the song, we have a friend in Jesus. I've got a friend in Jesus. He's everything to me. I mean, Jesus is our friend. There's no doubt about that. But we've had a movement lately that moves us to this place where maybe we could become really comfortable with Jesus by making him our best bud. We're friends. We hang out every now and then. We spend some time together. You know, I give him some advice. He gives me some advice. We just we're cool with each other. And if that's what we think about Jesus, we're definitely going to miss who Jesus is. And how about this last one? I mean, sometimes, and this is kind of where we were maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, we kind of viewed Jesus as sort of the captain of the morality squad, that anytime you mess up, Jesus is watching. I mean, really, you better watch out. You better not... Wait, no, that's Santa Claus, sorry. But that's kind of how we think about Jesus. You better not pout and you better not cry and you better watch out. I'm telling you why, because Jesus is watching. And if you do any of those things, he's waiting for that moment. I mean, he's got lightning, and that's from the Bible. He's got lightning in his fist. So if he's got lightning in his fist, what is he doing with that lightning in his fist? He's going to throw it down at you anytime you do something. You better watch out. You better not say that kind of thing because, you might get struck by lightning. And who sent that lightning? Jesus. Because he's the captain of the morality squad. I mean, he's out there to make sure that you check all your moral boxes and that you're here on Sunday. And if the church building's open on Sunday night, that you're here too. And if it's open on Wednesday night, you better be here too. And you better keep on checking those boxes. Because if you miss a box, look out. Captain Jesus is going to get you. Now, certainly Jesus cares about the way you and I live our lives and that we make moral choices. But if this is what we think of Jesus, we're missing it as well. So I want to read to you. There's a moment where the angel shows up on the scene, the messenger of God, the angel Gabriel, and he comes to share with Mary a declaration about Jesus. And this is how Luke describes it. He says, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God." Now listen to the angel's words. And watch how these connect back to Isaiah. Watch how these connect to Isaiah's words as well. Here's what the angel says to Mary. "You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." You see, almost 700 years before Jesus was born, Isaiah was pretty clear on the fact that Jesus was coming to be the king who reigned over a kingdom that would never end. And then just a few months, 9 months before Jesus was born, there's an angel that shows up that was sent by God to say, hey, guess what? You remember that prophecy Isaiah made about one who would reign on the throne of his father David? You remember that prophecy? Remember the prophecy? Remember that part of it that said that he'll be a king and he's going to reign over a kingdom that never ends? That's about to happen, Mary. And you're going to play an incredible part in that story. You see, certainly Isaiah believed it. Gabriel knew it. Mary would come to find out that exactly those words were 100% true, that Jesus came to be king. Jesus came to be king of my life, king of your life, king of everything, king of this universe. He didn't come primarily to be just a good teacher or your buddy or a spiritual guru. I mean, Jesus is those things to some degree. I mean, there's some truth in every one of those, but the ultimate truth about who Jesus came to be is king. Now, you may be looking at that and you may be saying, yeah, okay, I got it. There were some prophecies made about Jesus or about a guy who would come, and all that's great, and there was an angel who showed up, but if you look at Jesus, and certainly this is an argument that's made today, if you look at Jesus, I mean, he never really claimed that about himself. In fact, there are times when Jesus seems to almost deny that that's who he is. I want you to think, and we've talked about this before, if you and I were to have a conversation today, and both of us knew that this was actually the last time we were going to see each other. I don't know why, let's not speculate into that too much, but we knew we weren't going to see each other again this side of heaven. This was the last time we were going to talk. Think about the words we would choose and how carefully we would choose our words. I mean, if I knew I wasn't going to see you again, I would pick my words extremely carefully. We wouldn't just talk about, what we're going to have for lunch. We didn't even talk about football yesterday, although, that's kind of important sometimes, right? I don't know what we'd talk about, but I guarantee you it wouldn't be small talk. It'd be big stuff. And so in Matthew 28, as Jesus is talking with his disciples and he realizes, here's one of the last things I'm going to say to you. And here are the last words I'm actually going to say to you. He begins them with these words: all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds kind of like king talk to me. Like I'm in charge of everything, and that's what I came to do. And I've actually fulfilled my mission. And because I've fulfilled my mission, here I stand in this moment, and all authority and on heaven and on earth belongs to me. And his next word is therefore. Because I'm king. Because I'm king, there are some major implications for your life and for my life as well. So let's go ahead and just ask this question then. Why does this really matter? Why does this really matter? I mean, why even have this conversation about Jesus being king? I mean, is it just another philosophical conversation that we're having that, yeah, Jesus is king. Okay, we got it. That's cool. Jesus is king. He came to be king of the universe. Fantastic. But maybe you're asking the question, why does this really matter to me? Well, I think the answer is pretty simple to this one, actually. It matters because somebody is acting as king of your life. And if it's not Jesus, whoever it is an imposter. I mean, if there's somebody that is acting as king of your life and it's not Jesus and he's king of the universe and he's king of everything, then that means that's someone, whoever that is that's sitting on the throne of your life, he doesn't belong there. She doesn't belong there. If I think about my life, just if I've done some reflection this week, and I've done this before as well, and anytime I do this kind of reflection and I ask the question, who's really sitting on the throne of my life? Or who is it that's battling with Jesus to be the ultimate authority, to be the king of my life? Now, I don't know about you, but this is my answer just about every time. It's me. I mean, it's not some sort of political influence. It's not the influence of Hollywood or the media. I mean, all those things, they have some influence. There's no doubt about that. But where's the real struggle between Jesus and the imposter? It's between Jesus and me. I mean, that's where the struggle is. I want to read to you just a quote real quickly. A friend of mine named David Young wrote a book. It's called King Jesus and the Beauty of Obedience-Based Discipleship. A wonderful book, several of you who read it already. Fantastic book. But I want to read to you something that David says in this book. And here's why this really matters. Here's what he does. And he says, in a number of questions, he says this. He says, with you in charge, how's your life going? How are your relationships? How are your levels of anxiety and fear? How much shame do you feel? How well do you sleep at night? How's your marriage? How's your prayer life? Your levels of peace and joy and happiness. And what David is ultimately asking is, hey, if you're king of your life, how's that working out for you? I mean, really, how good of a king are you? Are you successful? Are you just knocking it out of the park? Does everything go just really great for you? You know, if you're like me, the answer is no, everything's not great. Anytime I take the reins of my life, anytime I decide I'm in charge, my life does one of these. Big time left turn. The next thing I know, I'm crashing over the median, and I'm in the ditch somewhere, and things aren't going so well. You know, that's never happened when I've said, hey, Jesus, do you want to be king of my life? He's never been a bad king of my life. He's never been a bad king of anything. Jesus has always been the best king. Everything he does, everywhere he goes, every action, every word, Jesus shows himself to be the rightful king of the universe, and the rightful king of your life, and the rightful king of my life as well. And so I want to ask you a question that David actually asks, conclusion of this paragraph. It goes on a little bit longer in between the last quote and this one here. But he says this. He says, let me ask you this. What would change in your life if you started treating Jesus as nothing short of king of the universe? I think that's a question worth pondering. I think that's a question we ought to ask, because when we read the prophecies about Jesus, we have to conclude he came to be king. When we read the announcement by the angel Gabriel, we've got to conclude that Jesus came to be king. When we listen to Jesus' words, we have to conclude he came to be king. And when we look at our own lives, and when we see the results, when we see what it looks like when we sit on the throne, we've also got to conclude we're not good at being king. Here's where we're going to end this morning. And I want you to continue to ponder that question. What would it look like? What would it look like if you allowed the king of the universe to be king of your life? Here's the truth. Every time we read the Christmas story, the birth stories about Jesus, every time we look at these stories detailing his birth, we should discover again that when Jesus came to earth, he came to be our long-awaited king. There ought to be no question about that in my life and in your life. Here's the truth. Jesus is king. He is. He's king of the universe. Now, you can keep him from being king of your life. There's no doubt. He's not going to force himself on you. But he wants to be king of your life. And here's a promise I can make you. If you don't believe this is true in your life, then at least try to trust me for a second. He's a much better king than I am. And he's going to be a much better king than you as well. He won't let you down. Let's pray and then we'll sing. Jesus, I'm so thankful that you came to be king. I'm just grateful for that. I just confess for myself and for everyone in here who agrees with these words, we need you to be king of our lives. We need to acknowledge you as king over everything. Jesus, there are times as well where we have been the imposter king over our own lives. We want to call the shots. We want to be in charge. I pray that you'll forgive us for those times. God, I pray that if there's anyone in here this morning who has not yet made the choice to make you king of their lives, that this morning, by the nudging of the Holy Spirit or through the words that we've read together, that in their heart they would want more than anything to make you king this morning. Father, I pray that in all we do and in all we say, we will not leave you short of being anything but king. And that when people see us living our lives, if they were to ask the question, who is Jesus to these Christians? That they would walk away with the answer, oh, he's their king. That's my prayer. Pray this in your name, Jesus, and the church said, amen.